The moment my father looked at me across that conference table and said, "We'll take it from here, sweetheart," I knew exactly what kind of people I had been raised by. He had this smile, the one he saves for car dealerships and first impressions, practiced, effortless, like he'd rehearsed it on the drive over. My mother sat beside him in a blouse I'd never seen before, pearl earrings, the whole performance. My brother had his hands folded on the table like he was about to close a business deal. And in a way, I suppose he thought he was. My name is Serena Caldwell. I'm 28 years old, and until 8 months ago, I was nobody worth thinking about. At least, that's what my family had spent the better part of 2 decades making sure I believed. I should start at the beginning, though I'll warn you, it doesn't get comfortable for a while. My grandmother Iris Caldwell built her real estate portfolio the hard way. She started with one duplex in Savannah, Georgia in 1979, bought with money she'd saved waitressing for 11 years. By the time I was born, she owned commercial properties across 3 states. She never remarried after my grandfather passed. She didn't need to. She had her work, her garden, her strong coffee, and an opinion about everything. She also had my father, her only son, who had spent most of his adult life borrowing against her goodwill and paying back none of it. I didn't understand the full picture when I was young. Children rarely do. What I understood was that Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house in Savannah felt like the one place I could breathe. She had this big oak table that could seat 12, and she always made too much food, and she let me help her in the kitchen even when I was small enough to need a step stool to reach the counter. My father and his family, my family, had a different Sunday dinner energy. My brother Scott was 2 years older than me and had inherited our father's ability to charm any room within 30 seconds of walking into it. I had not inherited this. I was quieter, more careful, the kind of kid who read during family parties and got called weird for it. Usually by my brother, usually while adults were just out of earshot. My mother loved me, I think. But she loved my father more, and loving my father meant agreeing with him, and agreeing with him meant that when he said Scott had more natural leadership ability, she nodded. When he said I was too sensitive, she told me to toughen up. When he decided, after I got into a university in North Carolina instead of the local state school my brother had attended, that I was chasing something impractical, she sat at the kitchen table and said, "Your father just worries." I left for college and didn't look back much. My grandmother came to my graduation. My parents sent a card. I became a physical therapist. I worked at a rehabilitation clinic outside of Charlotte. I had a small apartment, a 10-year-old Honda, a cat named Pepper, and a life that was entirely mine even if it was small. I didn't talk to my parents often. My brother and I exchanged the occasional holiday text. My grandmother and I talked every Sunday. Same as always, except now it was over the phone. She called me her steady one. She said it like it was the highest compliment she knew how to give. In November, she had a stroke. She recovered, partially, but the doctors in Savannah were clear that her independence had a ceiling now. My father flew down immediately. I took a week off work and drove down the following day. When I got to her house, he was already there, already meeting with people, already using the phrase, "going forward," with a frequency that made my skin crawl. My grandmother was sitting up in her bedroom, thinner than I'd seen her, but sharp-eyed as ever. When I walked in, she reached for my hand and didn't let go for a long time. "Don't let them rattle you," she said. I didn't know what she meant then. My father suggested she sell the properties and simplify. My grandmother looked at him the way she'd probably been looking at him his whole life, with love and without illusion, and said she'd think about it. She didn't sell anything. She spent the following 8 months putting her affairs in order instead. She passed in July. Heart failure, sudden, in her sleep. Her attorney, a quiet, thorough man named Mr. Holt who had handled her estate for 20 years, called me the morning after. Not my father. Me. "Your grandmother asked me to reach you first," he said. "She wanted you to have time to get to Savannah before the formal reading." I drove through the night. I cried somewhere around the South Carolina border and pulled over for 10 minutes, and then I kept going. The reading was 2 days later. By the time I arrived at Mr. Holt's office on a Tuesday morning, my father and mother were already seated. Scott was beside them, his wife on his other side. They looked up when I walked in. My father's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Surprise, maybe. Something else underneath it. Serena. He stood, gave me a brief hug that felt like a handshake. Good, we're all here. I sat across from them. Mr. Holt opened the folder in front of him. I will not walk through every line of that document. What I will tell you is that my grandmother, Iris Caldwell, left her son, my father, the house he'd grown up in, clear of any debt. A clean, generous gift. She left my brother a sum that would have covered a down payment on a comfortable home. She left her entire real estate portfolio, 17 properties across Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee, valued by independent appraisal at just under $4 million to me. The room was very quiet for a moment. My father's face did not fall. It rearranged, slowly, like furniture being moved in a dark room. There must be some mistake, my mother said. She said it almost gently, the way you'd correct a child who'd added wrong. Mr. Holt looked at her with the patience of a man who had done this long enough to have seen every version of this moment. There is no mistake. Mrs. Caldwell revised her estate plan 14 months ago. It was properly executed and witnessed. My father set his copy of the will on the table. He smoothed the edge of it with his thumb. She wasn't well, he said. Toward the end, she wasn't herself. We can contest this. You're welcome to consult your own attorney, Mr. Holt said. I can tell you that your mother was evaluated by 2 independent physicians during the revision process, specifically to document her cognitive capacity. That documentation is part of the record. My father looked at me then. Not angrily. That came later. In that moment, he looked at me with something I can only describe as recalculation. Sweetheart, he said. We'll take it from here. I drove back to my grandmother's house that afternoon. I had a key she'd given me years ago. I walked through every room slowly, touching things. The oak table, the step stool she'd kept in the kitchen all this time. A photograph on the mantel of her and me at my college graduation, framed in something nice. There was a letter on her desk with my name on the envelope. Her handwriting was unsteady from the stroke, but the words were entirely hers. She told me she'd watched me build my life from scratch, without asking anyone for anything, and that she'd wanted to give me the foundation she'd built from scratch herself. She said she loved my father, but that she'd spent 40 years watching him treat resources like water, always assuming there was more somewhere upstream. She said she believed I understood that things had weight. She said, "Take care of what's real." I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket. I sat in her kitchen for an hour and didn't do anything. Then I called Mr. Holt and asked him what I needed to do next. My father called that evening. The charm was gone by the second sentence. He told me this wasn't fair, that he was her son, that I'd clearly influenced her somehow, that it wasn't right for someone with no business experience to be handed that kind of responsibility. His voice had an edge I recognized from childhood, the one that appeared when something he expected had been redirected away from him. I let him talk. I didn't argue. When he was finished, I said, "I'll be working with Mr. Holt. Any legal questions can go through him." He hung up. My brother texted me 20 minutes later. You should have told us she was changing things. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The following 3 weeks were the most disorienting of my life. And I say that having once had a patient coding during a session and having spent a shift in a hospital hallway afterward, disorienting because of the sheer volume of things I did not know. Property managers, tenant agreements, insurance policies, tax structures. My grandmother had kept meticulous records, bless her, and Mr. Holt walked me through everything with the thoroughness of someone who had clearly admired her. But it was still like being handed a map of a country where I didn't speak the language. I took 2 weeks off work. My supervisor was understanding. I sat at my grandmother's oak table every morning with coffee and folders and learned. I also hired a property management firm to handle day-to-day operations while I got my footing. That was the first good decision I made. There were others. What I did not do was respond to my father's attorney's letter, which arrived at the Savannah house 11 days after the reading. It alleged that my grandmother had been unduly influenced in the revision of her estate plan. It requested documentation. It used words like vulnerable adult in relation to a woman who had, 14 months prior, sat across from two physicians and answered every question they put to her without hesitation, and who had, in the letter on her desk, explained her reasoning with more clarity than most people manage in a decade of decisions. I handed the letter to Mr. Holt. He called my father's attorney. I don't know exactly what was said, but Mr. Holt reported back to me that the matter would not be pursued further, given the documentation. What he didn't tell me was that my father wasn't finished. I found out 6 weeks later when I got a call from one of the property managers, a woman named Vivian who had been managing 3 of the commercial properties in Augusta for the past 9 years. She called on a Thursday morning, careful and apologetic, to tell me that a man had come by the previous week identifying himself as my grandmother's son and claiming to be the estate executor. He had asked for access to the rent collection records. Vivian, bless her, had said she would need written authorization and had called Mr. Holt's office before doing anything. The call I made to my father afterward was the shortest conversation we've ever had. "What you did constitutes fraud," I said, "misrepresenting yourself as executor of an estate you have no legal authority over. I want you to understand that I know what happened. Vivian documented it, and if it happens again at any property with any manager under any pretense, I will file a complaint with the state attorney's office and pursue civil action." Silence. "Do you understand me?" I said. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I'm your father." "I know who you are," I said. "That's the problem." I hung up. I sat in my grandmother's kitchen for a few minutes. Pepper had ridden down with me from Charlotte and was asleep on the chair by the window. The afternoon light came through the curtains the way it always had. I made myself a cup of coffee and drank it slowly. Then I called Vivian back, thanked her, and told her she had exactly the kind of judgment my grandmother had valued, and I was glad she was staying on. My mother called a week later. This conversation was harder, and I won't pretend it wasn't. She didn't come in swinging like my father. That was never her style. She started with how much she'd missed me, how it had been a hard few months, how this wasn't what she'd wanted. She cried a little. Genuine, I think. My mother's tears have never been calculated, just imperfectly aimed. She said, "Your father is just hurt. He doesn't know how to show it any other way." "I know," I said. "Can't we find some way to make this feel more fair?" I understood what she was asking. The answer was no, and not because I was punishing anyone. The answer was no because my grandmother had made a decision and it was hers to make, and honoring it was the only thing I could do that would mean anything. "Mom," I said, "I love you, but I'm not renegotiating Grandma's will. That's not something I'm willing to do." She cried a bit more. We said goodbye. I don't know when we'll talk again. I've thought about that a lot. The way families don't break all at once, they just stretch until the distance becomes the normal state of things. 8 months later, I still live in Charlotte. I still work at the clinic 4 days a week now instead of 5. I drive down to Savannah once a month to meet with Vivian and the other managers, walk the properties, sit at the oak table. I've started understanding the map. 3 of the properties needed work: roof repairs, updated HVAC, 1 commercial unit that had been undercharging for years. I've been making those decisions slowly and carefully. I made a mistake in October, authorized a repair vendor without properly vetting them, overpaid by a significant amount. I was annoyed with myself. I fixed it and moved on. My grandmother made mistakes too. She told me once she'd nearly lost the Augusta property in 1994 because she'd trusted the wrong person. She fixed it and moved on. I got a real estate license this spring, not because I needed one, technically, but because I wanted to understand the language properly. Mr. Holt looked at me like I'd done something amusing and correct at the same time. I haven't spoken to my father since the phone call about Vivian. My brother texted me a Merry Christmas, and I texted back the same. That felt like enough for now. I framed my grandmother's letter. It's on the wall in my apartment, next to the window. Some mornings I read it without meaning to, the way you read something you've memorized but still need to hear. "Take care of what's real. I'm trying, Grandma. There's a thing that happens when you've spent a long time being the one people underestimate. You start to believe it, a little. Not entirely. There's always some part of you that knows better, that keeps the light on. But the doubt accumulates. Like sediment. You move through the world with this weight you didn't choose and mostly don't notice until someone removes it. The morning after the will reading, before the phone call started and the attorney letters and all the noise, I woke up in my grandmother's house before sunrise and sat on the back porch. Savannah in July is already thick by 5 in the morning. The yard was dark and warm and smelled like something green and permanent. I sat there and thought, she knew. She'd always known. She watched me move through my whole life, and she saw something my family had missed or chosen not to see, and she put it in writing and had it witnessed by 2 attorneys and documented by 2 physicians, and there was not one thing anyone could do to undo it. I'm not going to tell you the money fixed everything. It didn't fix my family. It didn't bring my grandmother back. It didn't make me a different person. What it did was give me ground to stand on that nobody had handed me before. Ground I could learn and manage and be responsible for. Ground that said, she believed you were capable of this. That's the part I come back to when it's late and things feel uncertain and I wonder if I'm doing any of this right. She believed I was capable. I think I'm starting to believe it too. I've thought a lot about why my grandmother did what she did. Not the legal part. That's straightforward enough. I mean the deeper reason. Why me? Why, after all those years of watching her son borrow and charm and assume, she sat down with an attorney and 2 physicians and made sure there was no room for misunderstanding. I think she understood something that took me most of my life to learn, that the way a person treats something they didn't earn tells you everything about what kind of person they are. My father never had to fight for anything my grandmother built. He arrived into her success and treated it like weather. Just there, something that happened to him. My brother was the same way. They moved through life with the easy confidence of people who had always had a floor beneath them, put there by someone else, and they'd stopped noticing the floor a long time ago. I had no floor. I built mine out of student loans and long shifts and a 10-year-old car I kept running with determination and very little mechanical knowledge. I wasn't better than them. I wasn't smarter. I just had to pay attention in ways they never did, because nobody was going to catch me if I stopped. My grandmother saw that. She watched it for 28 years and she decided it meant something. What I keep coming back to is that the outcome of this story, the will, the properties, all of it, wasn't random. It followed something. My father spent decades treating his mother's resources as an extension of his own entitlement, and when the moment came that actually mattered, she looked at that pattern clearly and made a different choice. My brother never called her on a Sunday just to talk. I did. Not strategically. Not because I wanted something. Because I genuinely wanted to know how she was. That's a small thing. But small things accumulate, same as the other kind. That's not luck. That's cause and effect playing out slowly, over years, in ways that are invisible until suddenly they aren't. The hard part, the part I sit with, is that character doesn't announce itself. You don't decide once to be honest or responsible or present and then you're done. You decide it every week, in small moments nobody's watching. Whether you call someone back, whether you do the thing you said you'd do, whether you show up when it's inconvenient. My grandmother built 17 properties over 4 decades, not because she had some gift, but because she made sound decisions repeatedly under pressure without anyone applauding her for it. I want to live like that. Not for what it might produce. Not for another will, another letter, another room full of people recalculating, but because it's the only way I know how to honor what she actually gave me. Not the properties. The example. When things feel hard now, when I make a mistake or a decision that doesn't land right, I go back to one line. The one she wrote in an unsteady hand on her desk in Savannah. Take care of what's real. I think she meant the properties, practically speaking. But I think she also meant everything else. The work. The relationships worth keeping. The version of yourself you're responsible for building. I'm 28 years old and I'm still figuring most of this out, but I know what direction I'm walking.